These are the ruins of Tintern Abbey. They stand monument to the passions, both immensely creative and powerfully destructive, that the Catholic Church elicits. Founded in the 12th century, this monastery, like so many others in the country, was destroyed by the agents of Henry VIII during the Reformation, as England split from the Catholic Church. I'm a long way from Rome here in the Wye Valley in Wales, but the influence of the Catholic Church in the modern day stretches far beyond even Europe. It finds itself in every continent on the planet. And whether you believe it's a force for good or a force for ill, the feelings that the Church, the Catholic Church, invokes in people are enormously powerful. Now, the Catholic Church finds itself at a crossroads. The last pope, Pope Francis, a liberal reforming pope, has died. The Church must now choose his successor, and it will do that through a process called the papal conclave, essentially meaning under lock and key. This is effectively a shut-away room where cardinals, the senior figures within the Catholic Church, will elect a new pope. There are no phones, there are no cameras, and there are no outsiders allowed. Today I want to tell you the story of how one of the most powerful men in the world, and it is always a man, came to be chosen in such a way. The story is grand, and it will take us across hundreds of years of European and global history. But the consequences of the decision made in Rome in the coming weeks will impact us all. Welcome to History Counts. This channel is all about how history shapes the modern world and the stories that you see in the news, from ancient rituals to modern power. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please do subscribe for more videos every week. The papacy hasn't always had a nice, neat way of choosing a new pope. During the early centuries of the church, in theory, the clergy in Rome were the ones to decide, but that didn't stop other people trying to meddle. Local aristocratic families would often try to influence the decision, and sometimes even emperors became involved. And the consequence of that was chaos. Papal elections were often long, highly disputed, and deeply political. At various points, different factions backed different popes, and each of them would claim to be the legitimate one. Things finally came to a head in the mid-13th century. In 1268, Pope Clement IV died, and the cardinals simply couldn't agree on who his successor should be. That papal election dragged on for nearly 3 years, until eventually the people of Viterbo, where the election was taking place, got fed up. They locked the cardinals into a room, they reduced their rations to just bread and water, and they even ripped the roof off the building to try and speed things along. It might seem a touch extreme, but it worked. A new pope was elected, and the church learnt a lesson. In 1274, Pope Gregory X formalised the system. Cardinals would be locked in a conclave, coming from the Latin of conclave, meaning with a key. They weren't allowed to leave until a new pope was chosen. Meals were regulated, secrecy was paramount, and the rules have stayed roughly the same now for centuries. The idea is to protect the election from bribery, from politics, and from outside influence. So who exactly are these men who get to choose who is the new pope? Well, they're called cardinals, and they're effectively senior figures within the Catholic Church. Their role isn't mentioned in the Bible, but originally they were clergy attached to the churches of Rome. Their role evolved over the centuries, and by the turn of the first millennium, they were effectively the closest advisors of the living pope. Over time, it became tradition that only they could choose the new pope. Today, there are 135 cardinals who are eligible to be involved in the papal conclave. They're known as the cardinal electors. They're mostly bishops, archbishops, and Vatican officials. The idea is that they represent the global church. They represent the scale of the church across the planet. But the decisions are also political because cardinals are appointed by the Pope. So the decisions of previous papal conclaves have an influence on the decisions of the next one. And that brings us on to the home of papal elections and the papacy itself, the Vatican. It wasn't always the home of the conclave. For many centuries, popes were elected across churches and palaces all over Rome. But by the late 15th century, Pope Sixtus IV had commissioned a new chapel that was destined to become the permanent home of the papal conclave, the Sistine Chapel. Today it's probably most famous for its ceiling, painted a few decades later by the great Renaissance painter Michelangelo. It shows the story of creation, the fall of man, and God reaching out to Adam. Just think about it. It's one of the most sacred decisions that the Catholic Church makes, and it's made under one of the most iconic images of all time. It's theatre, it's symbolism, but it also reminds the cardinals of just what is at stake. The last two conclaves have been anything but routine. In 2005, Pope John Paul II, one of the most influential popes of modern times, died, and the papal conclave moved incredibly quickly. Within 2 days, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger had been elected as Pope Benedict XVI. But what happened next was almost totally unheard of. In 2013, Pope Benedict did something that no pope had done in over 600 years. He resigned. The Catholic world was stunned, and the conclave that came just 2 weeks later elected Pope Francis, a liberal, in total contrast to the conservative Benedict. He was the first Jesuit, and he was the first pope from the Americas. It goes to show that even though the rituals that are behind the election of a new pope are ancient, the outcomes can still surprise the world. And so now, in the wake of Pope Francis's own death, the cardinals of the Catholic Church are gathering in the Vatican ready to hold a new conclave. At the end of each day, they will burn their ballots. If the smoke rising from the Sistine Chapel is black, no new pope has been elected. If the smoke is white, then the 1.2 billion Catholics around the world have got their new spiritual leader. There will be no phones, there will be no media, there will be no leaks. It's one of the last few rituals of absolute secrecy left in a very public world. It goes to show that even in an age where most Western leaders are elected by social media campaigns and televised debates, tradition and even to some degree secrecy can still hold immense power. The consequences of the decisions made behind the locked doors of the Sistine Chapel in the coming weeks are going to have repercussions for global politics, for Catholic doctrine, and even international relations. The history of the Catholic Church runs from ancient Rome to the modern day. It's one of the oldest institutions in the world, and the reaction to Pope Francis's death shows that despite that huge history, its influence looks set to extend far into the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I'm still quite new on YouTube, so any subscribers would be hugely welcome. Please do leave your feedback on my videos as well, and do remember to tune in next week when I'll have another video.